Hello and welcome to today's lesson. I am excited that you are joining us. Today we are going to be learning about domain and range. So if you were going to be working on this in Study Island, it's under that same topic, domain and range. This is part 2 of the videos that cover the topics in that lesson, domain and range in Study Island. So make sure if you're working on those questions that you watch both the videos so you can understand the questions in all of them. So as always, just remember our study tips. Remember that you're going to want to take notes, and that way you can look back on them to study, or if you are working on problems later, then you know you have something to reference. And remember, if I go too fast, you can always pause and rewind to catch up. And then also, if I'm working on a problem, feel free to pause it, look through it, think about what you can do on your own, and then watch what I can do, and that way you can pick up what it is that you need to still learn, if anything at all. So I'm excited that you're here, and let's look at some notes on domain and range.
First, let's look at the difference between domain and range and their definitions. To help us do that, I have these two acronyms. The first one is for domain, DIX, and the second one is for range, ROY. And so in the first acronym, DIX, this D is going to stand for domain, the I is going to stand for input, and the X is going to stand for the X coordinate, because the definition of domain is that the domain of a relation is a set of all inputs or X coordinates. So domain, D, inputs, I, X coordinates, X. So that's just a little acronym to help us remember the definition. The one for range is very similar. The R stands for range. The O stands for outputs. The Y stands for Y coordinates. And the actual definition is going to be the range of a relation is the set of all outputs or Y coordinates. All right, so make sure you pause and get this in your notes. And just as a recap, domain is input, range is output. Domain is the X coordinates, range is the Y coordinates. When you're asked to find the domain and range of a relation or function, you could be asked to find it from a set of ordered pairs, a table, a mapping diagram, or a graph. And this is the same relation represented all 4 different ways. So if you look, the point 0, -4, here it is on the table, here it is on the mapping diagram, and here it is on the graph. Point -2, 3, there it is on the table, mapping diagram, graph. 1, 3, here it is on the table, there it is in the mapping diagram, here it is on the graph, and then the last one, 2, 0, also shows up in all 4 places. All right, so if we're going to find the domain, remember DIX, domain is inputs or X coordinates. So my X coordinates here are 0, -2, 1, and 2. The same with the table. It's just this time in the table, it's in numerical order. -2, 0, 1, 2. Mapping diagram, -2, 0, 1, 2. And on the graph, I have to think about what is the X coordinate of each of these points. So I have -2, 1, 2, and 0. So if I look, that's my domain. And domain is typically written in numerical order, smallest to greatest, with the brackets around it. It's just a standard way to write domain. And then range is the same thing. It's going to be the Y coordinates of my set of points, my Y column in the table, my output column in the mapping diagram, and then my Y coordinates in the graph. So if you look, I have 3's here twice, and here Y coordinate 3, Y coordinate 3, 0, -4. Those 3's appear twice. You only have to write them once in the range. It's just redundant to list it twice. And then just a quick review, is this a function or not a function? My x's don't repeat, so it is a function. The y's does, but we don't care about the outputs if you remember about functions, just the inputs repeating. All right, so here's an example of something you might see on Study Island. It wants to know which of the following has the domain of -5, -4, -2, 1, -1, and 3. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at these points on the graph and see what their x coordinates are. And if they match exactly what's listed here for the domain. So the x coordinate of this point is -5. The x coordinate of this point is -3. -3 isn't in our domain, so we know it isn't w. So I'm going to go ahead and go to x. Okay, the x coordinate of this point is let's make sure we get them all first. So this first one, the x coordinate is -5. So far, so good. The x coordinate here is -4. That's good. The x coordinate here is -2. The x coordinate at this point is -1. The x coordinate at this point is 1, and this one's 1. And it's okay, it's there twice. It's just only going to be listed once in the domain. And then here it's 3. So then the range, ROY, is going to be my y coordinates. So I'm going to look to see if my y coordinates hold true. So here I have a y coordinate of -4. Okay. Here I have a y coordinate of -2. Okay. Here I have a y coordinate of -1. That checks. Here I have a y coordinate of 1. This point has a y coordinate of 3. This point has a y coordinate of 5. And this coordinate has a y coordinate of 6, which is exactly what's listed here. So my answer should be x, but let's just go ahead and go through the other two choices to make sure I didn't make some mistake. So I'm going back and I'm looking at domain first, so it means I'm looking at my x coordinates. The x coordinate of this point is -5. The x coordinate of this point is -4. The x coordinate of this point is -2. The x coordinate here is -1, so far I have them all. This one is 1. This point's 3. So my domain's okay here. So let's double check the range and hopefully we find a mistake because we already think x is the answer. So for my range, I have a -2 for this one, a -1 for this one, a 1 for here, a 3, and a 4. Well, there's no 4 in this range, so it's not going to be y. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my x coordinates here. This one has a -4. So this one started with the -5. So I go and look at the x coordinate -5. There's no point that has an x coordinate of -5. So it's not in the z's domain, so my answer can't be z. So my answer is x, which is letter D. This next example, we're looking at a graph once again, but this time instead of it being a set of points, it's a continuous line. So when we're looking at for the domain and a range of a line or curve, we want to look to see where it begins and ends. So here, the graph has a definite beginning at the origin. And here, when it goes to the edge like that, you assume that there should be an arrow there and it continues on. So in this question, it wants to know what is the range. So remember, range, we're looking at the y coordinate. So I'm going to go at where it stops, where my graph starts. It definitely starts here. So it's going to have I'm going to look at the y-coordinate there. The y-coordinate there is 0. And then from there, it continues to rise. And we assume that it continues to rise forever. So it doesn't really have an ending. So it just keeps rising into infinity. So that means my range is going to go from 0 to infinity. And a sideways 8 is the infinity sign. And the way that that is written, it's going to be with inequalities in my answer. So B tells me it's negative infinity to 0. That's not the case. C says it's negative infinity to positive infinity, means it goes forever in both directions, which isn't the case. So A and D are both the ones that have 0 to infinity. The only difference is I have a plain less than symbol in A, and in D I have a less than or equal to symbol. So here, this is saying 0 is not part of the range, and this is saying it is part of the range. So the graph, there's a point there at the y equals 0. It exists at y equals 0, so it's going to be D. Anytime you have these two less than symbols by a variable, that just means in between. So that means the range, or y, is in between 0 and infinity. Okay, for this next example, we're now looking at how to find the domain and range in a set of points. So remember, domain, DIX is our acronym. It's going to be my x coordinates. So my x coordinates here are -2, 1, 6, and 8. So that's my domain. And here they are listed in letter A. All right, this one's a little bit different. It says if the domain of the function is 8x squared minus 4y equals 8 is -1, 1, and 5, then what is the corresponding range? So it tells me that these are going to be my x coordinates because that's the domain. So all I'm going to do is substitute each of these x coordinates into my equation and see what I get for y coordinates. And those three answers is going to be my range. So I have 8, and then I'm going to substitute in that first x coordinate, and I'm using parentheses when I substitute, and then I square the -1 minus 4y equals 8, and then I'm going to need to solve for y. And then I'm going to do the same thing for all three of those points. So I'm going to do it again where I'm going to substitute in +1, square it, minus the 4y equals 8. Then also do it for the last one where I substitute in the 5, square it, minus the 4y equals 8. So then I just have 3 equations here I need to solve. So order of operations, when I'm solving, is I want to go ahead and square this -1. And -1 times itself, or -1 times -1, is going to be 1. So I have 8 times 1 minus 4y equals 8. And then 8 times 1 is 8, minus 4y equals 8. And then I want to get this y by itself, so I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. These 8's cancel, and I'm just left with the minus 4y. And here, these 8's cancel also, but I can't just leave it blank, so I'm going to write a 0. Then I'm going to divide both sides by -4. These -4's cancel, and 0 divided by -4 is 0. So my first answer is 0. And there is only one choice here with 0 in it, but you like to make sure that you didn't make a mistake on your first one, so it's a good idea to work the problem through the whole way. So 1 squared is 1. 8 times 1 is 8. And then I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. This is very similar to that first equation I did, where I'm just left with the minus 4y. 8 minus 8 is 0. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. Negative 4's cancel. So I'm left with y equals, and 0 divided by negative 4 is 0. So I have a 0 once again. Okay, so I'm going to do this one last time. Number 4, I have 8 times 5 squared. Well, I do the 5 squared first, so that's 25. Then I'm going to do that 8 times 25. If I have 8 quarters, that's going to be $2. So 8 times 25 is 200. Minus 4y equals 8. So then I subtract 200 from both sides, same kind of steps as my first two equations. And then I have negative 4y equals negative 192. And then I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. And that just leaves me with y on the left, so y equals, and then negative 192 divided by negative 4 is going to be 48. And so then there's my range, 0, 0, 48. And there's my answer, letter B. Now, most of the times you're only going to see it with the 1, 0. This time they chose to write it. They didn't need to. It's a little redundant, but it's not wrong to write it twice. Okay, my last example here is I'm looking at a table in more of a word problem situation. I have the California residential energy price estimates there for the year 2000. And it lists the different ways that energy can be provided. We have coal, natural gas, petroleum products, wood, and electricity. And it wants to know, what is the range of the relation above? Well, range, that's ROY, ROY, is outputs and inputs. Well, our outputs here is the monies. So these 5 numbers are our output, which is letter A. So thank you for today, and I hope that you learned something new.